Hey everyone, just a quick note before we get started that today's episode is another one of my new promoted episodes that I've been experimenting with. Promoted episodes are curated, screened episodes with guests who have pitched me about a topic for the show that is a little outside of what I normally bring to your ears twice a month, but not so far as to be irrelevant. So all of these guests have to be personally screened by me before I will offer them a recording slot. And just like my regular guests, they don't receive the questions up front either. So you're going to hear a very candid interview, just like I do with all of the regular guests that I invite on the show. If you like what you hear in this episode, I do encourage you to reach out to this guest, which also helps support this podcast. And if you don't like it, I want to hear about that too. So please head over to designingforanalytics.com/promoted. You can leave me email with your feedback on this episode, and you can also learn more about what these promoted episodes are for your company. And now, without further ado, let's jump in.
Hi, this is Shri Santhanam, EVP of Software Platforms and AI, and Chief AI Officer of Experian North America. You're listening to Experiencing Data with Brian T. O'Neill.
You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
Welcome back to Experiencing Data. This is Brian T. O'Neill. Today, I have Shri Santhanam on the line from Experian. How's it going, Shri?
Going well, Brian. Glad to be here.
Yeah. We are going to talk about AI products. And I would like to actually kind of compare these to traditional digital products and maybe cover the span of that and how you're thinking about that at Experian. But before we do that, since we do have a global audience here, I think most people in the North American side here, we're immediately thinking credit score. What's my credit score? And that's what we associate Experian with. Can you let our audience know, our global audience kind of know what is Experian? What are the services and products that you guys build and kind of relate that to your work as the North American Chief AI Officer?
Absolutely. At Experian, we have among the most valuable data sets in the planet. And for decades now, we've been using the power of data to drive impact with businesses and consumers. Yes, a lot of consumers in particular know Experian as a traditional credit bureau. But over the last 2 decades, we've made significant investments to really transform ourselves into much more of a platform company. So a data-driven platform for which AI plays a significant role in powering our business. My role is to use the power of AI to help amplify the impact of our data with both businesses and consumers. And that involves developing new and innovative products, which we can bring our consumers and businesses. It involves productivity and helping us manipulate data, carry out our processes, develop products faster, and also then building scalable platforms on which we can create these products and productivity tools at production scale. So my role at the core of it is amplifying the impact of our data with artificial intelligence.
Yeah. And just to get more specific into the nitty gritty here, would you say Experian's business is primarily B2B and it's where in terms of revenue, is this an 80-20 rule where you have one primary product that's kind of 80% of the company and then a long tail of other things? Is it consumer mostly? Maybe help, again, our international audience just kind of know who's buying your services? What are they buying when we talk about an AI product, for example? What exactly are you selling?
So first, the answer on our core business, historically, a couple of decades ago, we were primarily B2B, and our business focused primarily on data with consumers. That has significantly evolved in the last 2 years, and we have quite a significant consumer business as well. And we have a direct-to-consumer business now, which accounts for, I don't know the latest numbers, but a pretty significant portion of our business, 30-40% of our business in North America and increasing portions, and it's fast growing. It's a significant differentiator for us because we believe ultimately data is coming from the consumer. So a direct relationship with the consumer is going to be incredibly valuable in the longer term. In terms of our core products, there are three big things we provide businesses. We provide them with data, we provide them with software, and then we provide them with analytics and AI on top of that. And our B2B customers typically tend to use those things across the lending life cycle. Many of our customers are lenders. They use it to make better decisions on how they originate customers, how they market to customers, how they drive underwriting decisions, and then manage the entire customer life cycle. So that's the core of our business, which is to help financial institutions, for the most part, make better decisions using data, software, and AI. And over the last several years, we've diversified significantly beyond that core.
So when you talk about AI products at Experian, is this an umbrella term for internal data products, either used by like vendors or the marketing department or the sales team, as well as like commercial ones that pay for access? You're selling it to a bank, maybe you're getting a yes/no credit decision or something like that. Does this span the gamut, or do you have different words and labels? And the reason I'm asking is like this term data products, which we talk about on my show quite a bit, it has very different meanings depending on who you're talking to. So when you say it, I'd like to know your version of it. So when the listeners hear you say it, they kind of know what you mean. So maybe you could just unpack that a little bit, this topic of data products, and what is a data product or an AI product? Which audience is it for? Is it all of them or just limited? Could you kind of unpack that?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I'm referring to AI products or data products, I'm referring to the gamut. Often, many of the products which we bring our customers have their origins in tools or productivity tools that we've built internally. I'll give you an example. One of the products which we're seeing a lot of traction now with our B2B customers, large financial institutions, is the Experian Assistant. The Experian Assistant is a 24/7 expert, a data tutor, and a code advisor, which is built with an agentic AI framework that we're driving. And it solves the problem of answering very specific, detailed questions about our data. Typically, these questions would be answered by our experts, and we receive several hundreds of these sort of questions every week. And now we have the ability with the Experian Assistant to put that in the hands of our customers 24/7. We built this as first an internal tool for us to use. And over time, what this has become is it's achieved the level of accuracy, fidelity, which we're now putting it in the hands of our customers directly. So that's the gamut. As I think about AI and data products, it includes both tools and products that we use internally as well as externally. Broadly, for us, the way we think about some of these products, there are products which are purely around providing data to our clients, and there's products which are software, and then there are products which we fall in the category of AI-powered or analytics-powered, which are ultimately data and software, but they either have powerful machine learning powering them or generative AI in some form. Mm-hmm. Eventually, our vision is to be seamless across all of these categories and just sell products as part of a platform in the background, which we can deliver in a modular way.
So you kind of carved out the AI and the analytics side there. So tell me a little bit about how, if it's different at all, how is it different making those? And I don't mean from a technical standpoint, but I mean from a team makeup, for example. Do you use a different team framework if it's going to be, an AI-powered solution versus a more traditional, digital software product? Is it kind of like, no, we just have extra, data science experts on top of our regular engineering team, and it's the typical triad of, UX, product, and engineering? Maybe talk to me about the team makeups and how, if at all, AI makes it different.
It's an important question, and one which we are constantly looking at. How do you actually best set up to innovate in this space? Our best view and how we're mobilizing around it now is we have teams structured with multi-specialists, almost like startups, because what we're finding is given the pace at which the technology and the knowledge in this area is evolving, you need people innovating here who are ready to roll their sleeves up and do multiple things. They're willing to spec out the product. They're willing to dabble a bit in the data science. They're willing to get into some vibe coding. They're willing to write some of the tech stack themselves. And what we found is this was pretty critical for the Experian Assistant. What we had a small team of 3 or 4 people. And in the early days, you couldn't really tell who was the product manager, who was the engineer, who was the designer. And it was quite seamless. Once it started achieving a set of scale and maturity, we started formalizing those roles. But an important part of innovating in this space is you need folks who are multi-specialists. And what we very much encourage our product folks to do, who are at the core of this, is essentially serve as mini CEOs at the center of their business, as a startup CEO, if you will. And so this involves them wearing different hats as they're going through that innovation. As these products achieve a greater degree of maturity, then some of the more well-known and trodden sort of frameworks like product teams and design, as well as like PI planning and queues, development queues and sprint cycles come into play. But at that early stage, these multi-specialist skills become pretty critical.
Every company would love to have tons of those kinds of people. So I'm curious, is there a baseline minimum though? Like if the CEO snapped his fingers today and said, Shri, I have this new thing I want to see. I want to see a prototype in 2 or 3 months here. We think we can do X, Y, and Z with the business. Who are you staffing besides like John and Jane, some specific person? Like, is there a minimum skill set or core team that you would deploy? Like, I got to have one of these, I got to have one of these, and I got to have one of these. Is there any framework like that you kind of follow, or is that too prescriptive?
Well, what we have is we have a centralized group with some of this specialized talent. It's called the Innovation Lab at Experian. And typically for exactly that sort of request, a high profile incubation of a product which we believe shows promise, we'll typically staff it with a couple of the right people from the Innovation Lab, the right leadership, and then, of course, an engineer, the right product person, and the set of folks around that. And what we find is bringing that specialized skill set into the mix really makes a difference in the early days. Once the product starts to achieve scale, the folks from the Innovation Lab will withdraw and they'll go back to the next assignment or the engagement. But breaking new ground and cracking some of these problems, we find that requires a specialized skill set, which we're achieving through our Innovation Lab.
Oh, interesting. So the Innovation Lab is not necessarily synonymous with like the equivalent of a product manager, an AI product manager that we would think of as kind of running a product. Is that they would come in later, or is they would be recruited by, or something along those lines by this?
They would work alongside and they would pick up the product once it's gone from 0 to 1. The early stage innovation, certainly there are product managers who will be involved in some of that, but particularly with AI products, because it requires this specialized skill set. In the early days of generative AI, we had to have access to the right large language model APIs. We had to understand how to manage security. We had to understand how to work through prompt engineering. And so we had a set of folks who had these specialized skills who would come in and help alongside our core product managers to drive that. But now we're finding some of the early product managers involved in this can in turn play some of this role as well. And so they're starting to become part of this group of folks who can operate in this new normal.
Got it. Are you growing these in a lab? These people in this innovation team, are these typically like data scientists with like strong business acumen? Like, is there any general characteristic that you see common across these individuals in terms of skills or background?
Yeah, it's Along the lines of what you said, I think the individuals here tend to be deeply technical with an interest in product innovation rather than the reverse. So the background of some of these folks is they're either PhDs in machine learning or data science or deeply technical engineers, and they've been working with our data for a while, but they've also been involved in some of the early stage innovation in these products. They're the modern day equivalent of a product hacker, if you will. So they'll prototype things quickly. They're typically multi-specialists as well. So they know a bit of engineering, but they have a T-shaped view. Usually they'll have a strong specialization in maybe data science or ML engineering or the use of generative AI, but they're usually pretty handy across like the whole stack in building applications. And that's really necessary at the early stage of innovation, particularly given the enormous amounts of data we have as well. These folks have to really be able to understand and work with large amounts of data at the early stages of innovating on these products.
Do you feel like there's something about the AI technology that removes what I would say, I would typically find a bias there, like just from my own advising when I meet technical founders, they tend to be very focused on shipping an accurate output and then hoping that someone might need it. And so things like model accuracy, or like in your case, like, is it returning the data that we'd expected? Like, what are the confabulations like? Is it trustworthy? They're not necessarily looking at like, does anyone care? Would someone pay for this? Did it remove friction? Did it build trust? Like all these the human factor side, or let alone the business side, is it valuable enough that anyone would even entertain your time to look at your prototype? Tell me, do you find a bias there, or how do you counter that, especially with highly technical? If you're talking about people with PhDs, I find that audience tends to be much more interested in building cool stuff that technical people like. I'm generalizing, but maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
It's a fair concern. When we set up our AI program, we laid out a set of principles which were very clear in how we made some of these choices. Mm-hmm. One of the core principles was, we said, working backwards from impact. And for any piece of work which we're doing, and particularly with the innovation lab in the last 2-3 years, any project or piece of work we're doing actually starts with a work back story on ultimately what do we think the business or consumer impact here is going, what do we think it's going to be? And so when the whole ChatGPT meteor hit Earth, November 2022, I think, right after that, when we kicked off our program, we had about 250, 300 use cases identified. And as you can imagine, smartest people across the company, all of our PhDs included in that, came up with a bunch of ideas. And we had to go through a pretty rigorous process of saying, where do we want to place our bets? Where do we want to drive our impact? And a lot of how we prioritize the work, what we sponsor, works back from that impact. And so how we deploy our forces here, both in the innovation lab and our product forces, we have a pretty robust framework of impact which they're tracking against. And we're also quick to shut things down if we don't believe we're achieving the results or our hypothesis, which we initially anticipate is not working out, then we're quick to shut down and pivot. So those two key principles on, first, working backwards from impact, and then second, shutting things down quickly if we don't believe it's achieving the business result, help us manage against that. These things are easier said than done, but for the most part, we've had a reasonably good discipline in working through that and managing and seeing what would work.
Is there like a recipe you follow for establishing kill criteria on these? Because I mean, you can prototype forever and you can keep working at accuracy and you can keep working at some of these, but there's like the viability part. How do these teams, or who decides like what the kill criteria is, or what the progress metrics are, right? We won't know if it's viable for a long time, but how will we measure along the way if we're having an impact at all? Is this innovation team, is that their job? Is this like the product manager's job to come in later and establish this? Or like, how do you all think about that?
We have a framework called Athena, which we use in our company, which actually establishes specific guidelines and guardrails for different stages of innovation. And it's called an innovation system management criteria. So very much like the way to think about the parallel for that is almost the stages of funding of a startup. If it doesn't achieve certain milestones, it runs out of money. And so what we do with our business sponsors and business unit heads is create those criteria. They're often done in collaboration with the finance and the business leading teams. And we say, okay, in 6 months, we expect to, and I'll give you an example. For the Experian Assistant, for instance, we said we're willing to sponsor an initial proof of concept, but within the first 3 months, we want at least 3 of the top 50 financial institutions we work with to have signed up for betas in demonstrating enough interest. Because if they're signing up for a paid POC or beta, well, the team came back and they ended up signing about 10 of them. So we knew that we'd met that criteria and we were certainly going ahead. Now, that doesn't mean that they're in the clear. There's other stage gates in 6 months and 9 months to continue that scaling. But typically, what we're establishing at each stage gate of innovation is some clear KPIs. They tend to be in earlier stages, they tend to be around customer engagement and customer feedback. And then as we start scaling, they tend to be much more tangible financially in how much we expect and the ROIs we expect.
Got it. When you talked about customer engagement and all of that, are you alluding at all here to user experience and any specific way that you would measure experience as a measurement of adoption and engagement? Because I could see something like the Experian Assistant, which is like, well, maybe the demo gets bought or someone buys into it at the business level, but it's going to be used by all the loan officers who did not get to choose that they wanted to use this thing. So it's kind of like top down. So it's like, technically, it could be maybe your models give faster and better recommendations, but the transparency is different because the model feature, like yes, no credit decision, you're not going to see that old stuff you used to see. Now you're going to get different reasons why. And so the loan officer's like, I don't know anything about that. That's not what I'm used to seeing. And so I'm going to use the old one instead of the new one. Like these classic things that I'm making this up, but this is a classic thing I hear in the data product space, which is it kind of dies in the last mile because the adoption and change management piece was done after the technical prototyping was done. And so it kind of dies in that last mile when actual users intercept with it because they weren't the ones that decided to adopt it in the first place. So I'm curious, do you measure anything around user experience on this kind of journey to keep or kill?
Absolutely. I think in the early stages, for many of the products we see, it tends to be a combination. So the loan officers or the chief risk officers, if you will, they're often making this discussion, making the decisions with hands-on input from how their teams are actually using it. So you're right. Ultimately, the users may not be the economic buyers, but in our experience, particularly as the world of software and data is evolving, there's very much a try before you buy philosophy. We're saying most of our products, our clients will want to try and test them and validate them before they're ultimately making their decision. And so you're seeing the senior economic buyers looking at the pitch and demo we're giving them, but they're wanting to hear from their people on the ground who are using it and managing that through. So typically for the POCs and for the tests that we're doing, we're very closely monitoring engagement, satisfaction, and this is through both NPS scores as well as are they actually using the product? How many tokens are we seeing used by each of our clients? What are the kinds of questions they're asking? What is the frequency of engagement? How many users are using it? These are metrics and questions which we're monitoring on a very close and active basis. And on a weekly basis as well, we tend to touch base with the active users of clients and seeing how they're working through. If you look at some of our core data products like attributes and data, clients very often will say, okay, great, I'd like to see if I can use this data or attributes in a custom underwriting model that I'm building, and I'd like to see the lift I'm getting versus what I would have done otherwise. And in instances like those, we're working with them hand in hand to build some of those models. It might be a gradient boosted tree, or it might be a more traditional logistic regression. And that really proves out the value of our data or our tools. And so often, increasingly, what we're observing is the buying process involves, is the proof there in the pudding? And are we actually getting the benefit that we expect? And this proof of value approach is something we're starting to increasingly adopt across all of our products versus more of the traditional just trust us and use this like approach, which we're seeing.
Is there any involvement in, like, for example, you talked about this loan, we'll use this loan officer example. Are actual loan officers at a bank, maybe an existing customer of yours, do you have relationships there such that those people might be involved with making the Experian assistant early with the product? I'll call it the product team, whatever is in that innovation circle in the early days. Are they ever involved in the making, or are they really kind of just the first look after an MVP or a POC has been built? How involved are they in the ideation phase, problem definite? I mean, the classic product things we think about, right? Which is really defining the problem clearly such that you'll know if your solution's doing a good job. Any thoughts on that?
They're a critical part of it, actually. And I would say not just the senior execs, and it's more typically a risk officer or a head of analytics, and then the actual teams using it, who are the data scientists or the business analysts. I'll give you an example. For the initial version of the Experian Assistant, it was actually born on the back of a clear customer problem that we saw. And the simple customer problem was we were getting several hundred, like 1 week, I think it went to over 1,000 questions a week from our clients. And these are very detailed, precise questions on how do I use this attribute? Can this be used for this sort of purpose? They're not something you can just do a control F on a data dictionary and it'll give you the answer.
Right.
So, and actually in our discussion with one of our clients, we said, hey, could we not use generative AI to solve some of this? And so the whole idea of the Experian Assistant was actually born through an interaction with a client where it sparked the idea. Now, it was a challenge because when we found the initial version of the Experian Assistant, if you're not thoughtful in how you set up the architecture or the retrieval augmented generation, then you can get answers which are inferior and just don't really cut it. So it sounds good and it looks good and it even appears to be giving good answers, but then when you're actually using it, it just doesn't work. So we had to solve that problem, and our clients were pretty critical to helping us solve that. And as we started showing the first version to our clients, one of our clients came to us and said, hey, I have several experts in my business as well, and you have the information on how they're structuring queries and they're using your data. And I'm pretty sure when I'm doing something new, there's probably one of my sort of 50 experts who's probably done something similar in the past, but I just don't know, and I need to go and ask him. We said, that's a great idea. And we used that problem, which he said. This was a client from one of the largest financial institutions in the US. And so we went back and we said, actually, if we can have an agent learn from and understand the query logs from some of the best practitioners of the client themselves, the agent can serve as almost the best trainer specifically for that client. Obviously, in order to implement this, you need the utmost standards of privacy and data management, which we have in place. But that was a really important suggestion from a client saying, hey, can the Experian Assistant serve not just as an expert on the way Experian does things in Experian's data, but can it serve as an expert on how I operate and some of my data as well? And that served as a meaningful expansion and an area where the Experian Assistant could go next. So I think the problems that clients come back to us are critical parts of how we're innovating and how we're taking things forward in products, and no different with AI and data products here.
Is there anything you've changed in the last couple of years, or something you've learned just about how you're approaching the creation of these AI products? Like, it could be team makeup or some process thing or skill sets that are involved. certain personalities of the types of people that you have early on? Anything? I'm just curious what's changed, if anything, that you might note, lessons learned.
Yeah, probably three big lessons. So the first big lesson is grassroots innovation is really important. I think in the world we were in previously, you could probably get by with having some of the smartest people in the room or in the company have like a caucus and come up with the 2 or 3 ideas for products which would ultimately work. Now it's increasingly becoming important to unlock grassroots innovation. So you want the ideas to come from like across the company at all levels and departments. And enabling that grassroots innovation requires specific intentional choices on how you make technology available, how you drive training and adoption. So I think that was one key lesson. The second lesson was around some of our technology choices. And one of the expressions we use is be very cautious about going through one-way doors. And in any given week or month, I have like half a dozen vendors who will come and pitch the next big AI product or the next best tool. And many of them are really good, but it's also something that we have to be cautious about, because if we make decisions which are irreversible and we're going down a path that limits our ability. And so there's an interesting balance. And so how we set up some of these decisions, I'm very happy testing some of this software, even using some of this or tools where it's not a significant one-way door. It's not embedded in a way which will be difficult for us to change course if we need to. Where there are choices that are to be made, which are one-way doors, we're much more thoughtful and intentional. So I think that, particularly in this fast pace of AI evolution, has been a second piece. And then the third big learning is actually on people and product. I think the world of product management as we know it is going to dramatically change, and it's going to evolve. You're starting to see this with some of the big tech companies in how their expectations for product managers are changing, but we're starting to see it as well, and it's becoming very clear. I think the product manager of the future is much more of a multi-specialist. They're not purely a people manager, but they're able to understand many more domains, and they're also able to deploy tasks or assignments not just to a human workforce, but also to an agentic workforce. So if I'm the product manager of the past, I might have said, I have this design for this product idea, and I might be waiting for a designer to design some of the UI, create some Figma, and then eventually take that and then give it to an engineer to come back with a POC. In the future, I may be able to use a virtual agent to say, hey, like, jam with me to figure out what this UI looks like and create the initial version, write some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and mock up those screens. And I might go all the way to creating a working prototype, which I give to the engineer and say, hey, like, this is what I think might work. Can you take this to production and scale? So I think the third one's an important one. We're actually starting to see many signs of that. The Experian Assistant, for instance, the initial versions were built purely just by data scientists testing this on some of our grassroots innovation and enterprise tools, which we'd sort of built. And there were 5 or 6 of them using it as we were doing it. And so that was all the way. So all of the prompts, the structure, the framework. And then we looked at it and said, great, we think this has promise. And then we scaled it. And the big advantage there as well is it allows you to be much more risk managed about your investments, particularly in AI. There can be 1,000 interesting ideas, but there's only a few tens of ideas which might actually have the adoption you need. And so those 3 things help us really understand where to place our bets, and the product manager of the future empowers this.
Yeah, especially with like, if your product managers are coming out of technical backgrounds, which can be really good, how do you make sure that you're not just delivering outputs faster? Because AI is definitely changing the speed of delivery work, but the challenge is still like, is this the right code, and is it the right design to achieve the business problem, someone still has to decide that even if you can make a Figma mockup faster or some front-end code, the question is, are you delivering any benefits? You talked about the impact. So I'm kind of curious, like, what's the check on being able to do delivery work faster? The harder skill to me is what should we make? What should the product be? What are the boundaries of the product? What might someone pay for? What behavior change are we asking somebody to make? Those are the wicked problems that are much harder to do. And I'm curious if you just have any reactions to that. Maybe your team is really good at all of those things. It's a tough space.
So just to clarify, I think those are really the key questions, and those don't change to me in the product manager of the future. I actually just think that you can make those decisions faster and with a high degree of accuracy in this new world. Because ultimately, the most important decisions and choices of product managers making are, what should I build? Will it work? Will it drive the business impact that I'm expecting? Will consumers adopt it? And in a more traditional world, I'm guessing and I'm creating requirements and I'm waiting for other teams to come back with output before I can actually test this.
Mm-hmm.
In the future, I think from an idea that I wake up with as a product manager in the morning to when I can actually test it with customers and decide if it's a good one or not, that time frame starts to compress and it takes away some of the dependency. And so what I am able to go through is with a much higher degree of confidence. And even with generative AI, like the Experian Assistant is one of 15 other ideas which we saw, but we abandoned. Now, we could be building those 15 ideas and there could be people going through that stuff, but our product managers actually saw those and said, well, actually, we've prototyped these, and when we're putting them in front of users, the change management isn't working, or these are harder problems. And so what happens is it actually makes the job of a product manager. And just to clarify, the ultimate production applications and what's actually spec'd and in the hands of the customer are ultimately built by engineers. That doesn't change. And I'm not suggesting that in the future, the role of the product manager becomes that. But it's certainly much more than just delivering requirements. They're going to be able to deliver validated requirements and business ideas and concepts which have a much higher likelihood of success, which have also passed the standard of being tested with customers and coming back. And that's a key part of our principle. If you look at the Experian Assistant, we went from idea to alpha client in record time. And that the only way that was possible is the teams were able to make some of those decisions faster in this world. And our product teams or engineering teams are working almost seamlessly.
And in terms of these product leaders that you're talking about here, are you training these people? Are you trying to hire a specific skill set that already maps to kind of your vision of what that type of role looks like? I'm always curious. A lot of large enterprise companies, especially with internal data product teams, what I find is many of them are trying to adopt what's sometimes called the product operating model inside their business, even if it's just delivering internal data products to get more value. But what they're not doing is really borrowing the processes and the types of people that software companies use. So they don't have experienced software product managers, and they don't have designers, user experience people, or researchers on there. They're trying to grow them in-house, usually out of analysts and data scientists there. I'm curious if you're a blend of those. Do you see that's the way to go because AI products do need to have a data foundation, so we'll grow them ourselves and train them ourselves? Or no, I'd rather take a B2B software product manager, bring them in, and then enable them with more of the AI skill set if necessary. Do you have any way that you think about that with your hiring and staffing?
It's definitely an evolution. So we don't see it as a complete reset. We see it very much as an evolution. Mm-hmm. There are a few core skills that we're looking for. The first is we're looking for a curiosity and understanding and a desire to upskill, because AI as we're seeing it today isn't something that has been taught in schools or in universities for 15, 20 years. What we're looking for is certainly a mindset of curiosity and openness where people are signing up for Coursera courses on their own and upskilling and learning and have that curiosity. So that's one piece. I think the second, we do have people who we're looking for who are exposed to a track record of certain kinds of innovation, moving quickly in these areas, exposure to some of the tools and technology. But we see it as very much of an evolution, which we will support with our innovation lab at the center. So it serves as an accelerant for people to evolve and drive into these roles. We still think some of the fundamentals of how you do product, which is understanding what's likely to get product market fit, the discipline of solving clear problems, the discipline of writing clear, like PR FAQs, as Amazon would call it, we think are critical. What we do think is important is an evolution to understand the tools that might be available to be able to do all those things faster and at a higher standard. And that's what we're looking for.
Cool. Shri, thanks for sharing all this. Has been great. I could pick your brain for a lot longer, but I don't want to take too much of your time. Are there any closing thoughts? I want to ask how people can get in touch with you and follow your work. But before I do that, I kind of wanted to give you the last word. Is there anything that you'd like to share with our data product audience that's out there?
It's an exciting time to be in data products and AI products. I think the entire world is waking up to the power of what AI can do. And ultimately, AI relies on data and the data that it can read and what it can operate on. So I think it's an exciting time for our audience to be where they are. My main message to the audience is evolve and understand what this means for how you drive impact in your job and how you do your job, because that is certainly evolving and changing. And the sooner that you can skate to where the puck's going, the more effective you'll be.
Yeah, I agree. Where can people stay in touch with you if they want to follow your work? Is it LinkedIn, or we'll definitely put that in the show notes?
LinkedIn's probably the best place, and you'll see me post on LinkedIn, and I look forward to connecting with people.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for coming on Experiencing Data.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag Experiencing Data. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.